Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'm very pleased and excited to bring to you a special 5-part podcast series based upon an interview with Dr. Kyle Welch from George Washington University on his recent paper, Evidence on the Use and Efficacy of Internal Whistleblowing Systems. First, a word from our sponsor, Navex Global. Navex Global offers a comprehensive suite of ethics and compliance software, content, and services that helps organizations protect their people, reputation, and bottom line. With more than 13,000 customers, including 85% of the Fortune 500, Navex Global Solutions support the largest ethics and compliance community in the world. Over this 5-part podcast series, I take a deep dive into Dr. Welch's paper and explore why it is so important and significant for the compliance practitioner. We look into the background of why he started this study, what some of the key information he read to prepare for his research, what he expected or what predictions he had from looking at the numbers. Then we consider what his research found, and finally we tie it all together with what it all means for the compliance practitioner. This is one of the most significant academic studies for FCPA and anti-bribery compliance practitioners, and indeed all compliance practitioners. I know you will find this podcast series useful and helpful, as well as the paper, which of course we will link to in the show notes. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. This special podcast series is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for another episode in my 5-part podcast exploration with Dr. Kyle Welch on his recently released paper, Evidence on the Use and Efficacy of Internal Whistleblowing Systems. Dr. Welch, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So now we get to one of my favorite topics, which is, if not speculation, at least predictions. So I really wanted to ask you and really start this episode with what did you expect to find, and we'll go from there.
So like I said, I was open to any finding. Any finding would have been interesting to me as an academic. If we found nothing, that would have been interesting. If we had found something in a different direction than what we found, it would also be interesting. Before we do any of this research, we talk to people. And we talked to compliance officers. We talked to different people. Somebody with a lot of experience over at Navex. Her name is Carrie Penman. She was a fantastic resource in talking about compliance and how these systems are looked at and some of the feedback that's given to these systems. Some managers think that more reports is a sign of more problems, and some people think that more reports is basically uncovering basically things that you just wouldn't see otherwise. And going into it, I was truly open to the result going either way, either direction. And it's in academia, you call it, it's kind of discounted sometimes, but it's kind of it's a horse race. It's a horse race hypothesis where there's great arguments either way, right? Like I said, if you were to take a job at one firm or the other, salaries or names being equal, if one firm has more reports internally of problems, the average person on the street, if the Occam's razors, the simplest answer is that maybe that firm just has more problems. Maybe they're a low type, and so I was open to either side. What I found from talking to certain people that had been around the block with these systems, that were using these systems way before Sarbanes-Oxley, is that those that were of a certain type, usually a compliance officer that had been around the block, basically would say, look, this is what happens. The people that know, they look at these reports, they see where things are lighting up, they go to that part in the organization and talk about what's going on, and they use it as an indication, not of problems, but of something where they have good visibility. And so the almost every compliance officer I talked to had kind of two things in common. One, they saw it as a great system and something that provided visibility, and also they frequently complained that directors and managers would complain about the level of reporting. And so in kind of the people I was getting advice from, I was getting both sides on the predictions of both sides of the hypothesis, which makes for good tension in an academic study.
With that, what outcomes did you find associated with the robust use of an internal whistleblower system.
Okay. Well, this is great. I've been excited to talk about this because this is the neat part about it. So it turns out in that example I gave, if you were to pick the firm that had fewer reports, you would likely be picking the lower type firm or the worst firm between the two based on the averages. What we did is we looked at a large segment of data, lots of data on this, internal reports from a long history. There's over 1 million reports that we looked at related to public companies, and then we had access to over 3 million other reports, again, all anonymous, not disclosing individuals, details, or things like that, but enabling us to do the study and to actually connect it with external data to get outcomes. So let me go through some of those outcomes, and I'll talk about the levels of increase, what's associated with increased uses and decreased usage, and we'll talk about some of those key data points. All right. So those that are power users or high level users, that have more activity, we used a couple of measures of this reporting. We basically looked at level of reports, like how many reports they have, and then a combined measure of how engaged they were with the reports. How quick did it take them to resolve the issue, which we received basically a number on, and then how many times the report was accessed, right? So again, we didn't get details. We got a bunch of ones and zeros, and then we got to count for certain things. And one of the things we got to count for is how many people, how many times a report was accessed in the system. And so the correlation, the relationship is the same across both measures. And so you can just think of it as more reports, but even more engagement is also associated with this too. So what we found is that those that are more engaged with these systems are typically firms with higher quality earnings reporting. They're usually larger firms. They're more mature. They're older. They're more profitable firms, so firms with a higher return on assets. They're also firms with more leverage. And they're also firms with higher quality governance. So a question that might be out there is, how did you measure governance? Well, in academia, there's this thing called an entrenchment index, and I can talk about that in a little bit. But we use this measure to measure how entrenched management is. And those with higher governance of their organization are the power users, the ones that use it and have more reports and are more engaged with the system. The firms that are limited users are on the opposite side. They're firms with poor governance. They use more discretionary accruals, which is an indication of accounting potential accounting manipulation. They're usually smaller firms, newer firms that are less profitable. And a key attribute here is that firms facing extreme growth, and a couple people listening to compliance-wise would say, well, why is that? Why would it be firms facing extreme growth? Well, if you think about it, then the number one rule in an organization is to make the sale and to make the profit, right? And frequently, the first thing that goes out the door related to that rule is compliance, is following certain protocols to make sure that a sale happens. So it's not too surprising that firms facing extreme growth have a hard time utilizing the system because they have to transfer the knowledge of the culture of the organization externally, but they also have to externally to new employees. And so every new employee comes on has to be indoctrinated. The other aspect of this is that, they're trying to make closing deals and making sales. And if that means, doing something compliance wise might make that sale not happen, it could be that, this is neglected a bit and they focus more of their resources on making those sales. So that's the high level findings, and then we use that to determine, okay, what should we control for when we look at other outcomes? And one of the key outcomes we look at is litigation. And the reason why we look at litigation is because regulators come with litigious suits to firms when they violate these make violations, and employees do too. And so we look at material lawsuits that a firm has, and we find that firms that are power users have a lower level of actual material lawsuits with the organization, with material lawsuits with the company. And so what do I mean by materiality? Again, stop me if I'm going through things a bit too fast. I do want
to stop you right there.
Okay,
you
great.
said something that I found extraordinarily important, and frankly, I did not fully appreciate from your paper. You used the word litigation several times.
Yep.
I am a civil side lawyer.
Yep.
Government enforcement to me is different than litigation. So does your report include enforcement actions by the government where a fine or penalty was paid, whether that be on the civil and criminal side, or is it litigation by non-government actors only?
It is any material lawsuit that is brought against the organization. So the threshold is not, it's any court-related litigation that a firm is facing. Every public, so our results, because we use external data and tie it into NAVEX, these results are for public companies, using public companies, because that's where the data is. And so we basically look at the disclosures of litigation that firms face and the different court proceedings that they are in, and the fines that they are going to, the potential fines, and firms have to disclose that based on the materiality of these fines or the materiality with these lawsuits. So if they have a lawsuit with, say, a partner, maybe they have a joint venture with another firm, and there's a litigation over that, that would be included in this too. So this is basically a bucket. It's a bucket for any material litigation where there's an uncertain outcome to what's going to happen to the firm. And the key threshold here is that it has to be material is the threshold. And so any outcome that would lead to something that would be less than, as a rule of thumb, less than about 5% of gross profit would not be included in this. And so when you talk about what these lawsuits are, these are actually this is not a trivial count. These are things that the firm and the lawyers that represent these are things that are top of mind issues as far as litigation that they're facing. And what the finding is that the increased usage of these systems leads to fewer of these material lawsuits. And so to answer your question, yes, anything that would be seen in a court of law or court filings are happening, this type of thing. This is what shows up in this study.
Dr. Welch, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. I've been visiting with Dr. Kyle Welch on his academic recently released paper, Evidence on the Use and Efficacy of Internal Whistleblowing Systems. I hope you'll join us again where our next episode, where we take a little bit deeper dive into what his research uncovered. Dr. Welch, I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I hope you enjoyed this episode of my 5-part exploration with Dr. Kyle Welch on his recently released paper, Evidence on the Use and Efficacy of Internal Whistleblowing Systems. I hope you will find this podcast series as powerful a tool for you as a chief compliance officer or a compliance practitioner that you can have. I hope you will join us again for our next episode. This